there might be some haggling in Israel or Netanyahu trying to convince Trump that Israel needs to extend the war and not put an immediate end to it because the war is essentially the survival for Netanyahu and his coalition. But if Trump is determined that this war should end and thinking of the Nobel Peace Prize in the back of his mind, he could tell Netanyahu, do it now and do the complete deal, not the deal that's been negotiated over the past couple of weeks. That would be a 60-day ceasefire and a release of only 50% of the hostages.
All eyes are on Washington, where Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, will today meet Donald Trump to discuss a ceasefire in Gaza. Yesterday, the US President said we're close to a deal, but we've heard that before. And the conflict continues. What could be different this time? Let's speak to Gershon Baskin, former Israeli government advisor, hostage negotiator and director of the Alliance for Two States. Do you think it will be different this time? Do you think there will be a ceasefire?
Well, we all know that Donald Trump is unpredictable, but if we can base ourselves on what he's been saying over the last couple of weeks, what he's been putting out in social media, he's saying that this war needs to end now, the hostages need to come home. If he's determined, and he says this to Prime Minister Netanyahu in their meeting today, then that's what will happen, because Netanyahu cannot say no to President Trump.
Is it going to be a showdown, do you think, in that sense then, in terms of telling the Israeli Prime Minister it's enough?
Well, I don't think we'll see a situation of Netanyahu lecturing to Trump as he once did to Obama. This is a different relationship. Behind the closed doors, there might be some haggling in Israel or Netanyahu trying to convince Trump that Israel needs to extend the war and not put an immediate end to it because the war is essentially the survival for Netanyahu and his coalition. But if Trump is determined that this war should end and thinking of the Nobel Peace Prize in the back of his mind, he could tell Netanyahu, do it now and do the complete deal, not the deal that's been negotiated over the past couple of weeks. That would be a 60-day ceasefire and a release of only 50% of the hostages.
What gives this a sense of momentum that perhaps hasn't existed in previous negotiations are that these indirect talks between Israel and Hamas continuing yesterday in Qatar, but there are massive obstacles in terms of both sides rejecting changes that are being proposed by the other.
Right. The talks in Doha are not really important at this point. They're logistic talks, and all eyes are focused on Washington, as your headline said. The decisions that are taken today between Trump and Netanyahu are the determining decisions that we will be able to know afterwards whether or not this war will be brought to an end. What is different is that Trump seems more determined now to end the war. This is after the Iran war, after the Americans bombed the nuclear sites in Iran and credit themselves with destroying the Iranian nuclear program. Netanyahu himself is feeling emboldened because of the Israeli successes in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iran. So we might be actually much closer to the end of the war than we have ever been.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. That is the other feeling that has definitely come to the surface, that the Israeli Prime Minister feels he has had some success, but he hasn't got rid of or eliminated Hamas completely. And maybe that's because it's impossible, but he has massively depleted them. But taken in the round, do you think he thinks now, I do want a deal?
I don't think Netanyahu wants a deal, but I think he knows that he has to make a deal now because Trump wants a deal. Israel cannot eliminate Hamas entirely. That's something that only the Palestinian people can do. But Hamas is severely weakened, decimated in Gaza. There's no political leadership left. Most of the military commanders have been killed by Israel. They can continue to kill Israeli soldiers in guerrilla operations every single day that Israeli soldiers are there. And what we have against that is a large majority of the Israeli public that wants this war to end, that wants the hostages brought home, and even a large majority that want us to go to new elections to replace Netanyahu. Even though he's spiked in the polls, he's only spiked within his own coalition and still doesn't have enough support should there be elections to form a new government.
How much pressure, though, does he continue to be under, Netanyahu, from the far right in his cabinet? He's folded in the past, maybe willingly, but now, because of the successes that you have outlined, because of the pressure domestically and ultimately Donald Trump, does he feel he can say no to them?
Well, he also knows that he has the opposition that will vote for a deal in parliament if it comes to the parliament to vote. So he has enough votes to get any deal through that would end the war and bring the hostages home. One of his opposition figures, the Minister of Finance, Smotrich, doesn't cross the threshold in any of the political polls. So he's not so worried about Smotrich because he has no alternative. Ben-Gvir is a different challenge because Ben-Gvir has risen in the polls and he could bolt the coalition. But if Netanyahu is truly feeling emboldened and believes that the people of Israel are behind him, then he could also risk going to elections, bringing out the government. But we're on the brink of summer recess, which means that he would have a 3-month reprieve from any parliamentary action that would bring down the government. And he's been stalling to get to the summer recess.
Just briefly, Gershon, what about what's next? OK, let's say the fighting is stopped, if for 60 days and perhaps beyond. But there's no discussion, is there, as yet, about who governs Gaza next?
Well, this is long overdue. This is first and foremost the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian Authority president. He has to name someone who's going to govern Gaza or a list of people who can govern Gaza who are credible, who are clean, who have legitimacy within the Gaza Strip, and they would get support to the Arab states of Jordan and Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Qatar and others, because there'll be no reconstruction of Gaza whatsoever as long as Hamas is in charge. Hamas itself is going through deep discussions on their own future and whether or not they can continue to be a resistance movement backed by the armed struggle. There is no viable armed struggle anymore for the Palestinian people. This is something that they need to recognize. On October 7th, yes. 2023, Hamas committed national suicide without consulting anyone. This is essentially what happened.
Now, the US President Donald Trump will meet the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today as he tries to secure a peace deal in Gaza. It comes after rounds of indirect talks in Qatar between Israel and Hamas came to an end without a breakthrough. Joining me now to discuss all of this is Ari Kovler, a journalist in Israel. Ari, good afternoon. Donald Trump wants to give Benjamin Netanyahu an ultimatum about Gaza. Will that work? Is that a strategy that can work?
I mean, it can. Right now, Netanyahu owes Trump an awful lot, essentially, for saving him after he launched this campaign in Iran, counting on the Americans to come and hit the targets that the Israeli bombs couldn't reach. And Trump knows it. And Netanyahu is very susceptible to pressure on all sides. And absolutely, the right kind of pressure could work.
As we understand it, there may be no cameras and no press conference at this meeting. Instead, they're just going to meet for a private early dinner and talk behind sort of closed doors. What can we read into that? Does that you think make them more likely to get somewhere?
I mean, look, these are both men who love to be in front of the camera, and Netanyahu in particular loves to appear with US presidents. It helps him domestically to look like he's a strong leader. He's getting respect or whatever it is from the leaders of the world. So this kind of request must have come from the Americans. And that's because they want to kind of show Netanyahu who's boss. I think it makes it more likely that the pressure is on. And whether that makes it more likely for Netanyahu to agree or not, I don't know. But it's a strong statement from the Americans.
So what Donald Trump is expected to be pushing Benjamin Netanyahu for is a 60-day ceasefire with Hamas. What will Netanyahu want in order to agree to that?
Well, Netanyahu himself wants a 60-day ceasefire. What Hamas is saying is they're not willing to sign any kind of a deal that doesn't ultimately lead to a longer-term ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. They're not interested in short-term ceasefires. So what's happening is that Trump is pushing Netanyahu to find some way to agree that this will be the end of the war. Netanyahu is unlikely to be able to directly say that. At the moment, there's talk that Trump's going to maybe be the one that comes out and says it. If Israel and Hamas agree to a deal, Trump will come out and say, Israel is not going to go back to fighting and I won't let them. And this will kind of take the pressure off Netanyahu domestically, while also perhaps allowing Hamas to come to the deal. Whether or not it's going to work, I don't know. We had something not entirely dissimilar back in January, and of course after that deal, Israel did return to the fighting.
I mean, Israel's sort of red lines against Hamas seem to be that what Netanyahu is demanding is the demilitarization of Hamas and the return of the remaining hostages. I mean, alive or dead. How likely is it, do you think, that Hamas is prepared to go there?
Hamas is willing to return the hostages in return for Israel leaving it alone, basically. That's why they took them in the first place. Israel's position is we can't allow the fact that there are hostages to mean that we, let Hamas survive. So really the details are less about who gets returned. Ultimately, everybody is the hope. and more about what does the end of the war look like in terms of Hamas. Hamas has kind of accepted that maybe it won't be the ruling power anymore in Gaza after the war, but we still want to keep all our weapons. Israel said, well, as long as you are the biggest, baddest, most armed faction in Gaza, it kind of doesn't matter who we say who the prime minister is, you'll really be in charge. And that has been the main sticking point.
And look, finally, you've got this meeting between Netanyahu and Trump. There's also these ongoing talks in Qatar, although the one round of them has just ended. Which of those is the real deal? Which of those is a more likely place for a breakthrough to come from?
The ones in America, the ones with Trump. The talks with Qatar are technical. They're not very low level, but they're not high level. And they're really about details for a deal if it's agreed. The question of whether it's going to be agreed is happening through the Americans right now, both to Netanyahu at this meeting and also through Trump's indirect relationship right now with Hamas through the various fixes that he's having with them as well.